thanks to you for giving your life to your offspring and nurturing them. Also for those who are wives of mothers, or who are partners of mothers, or who have mothers, so that it's all of us. Let us recall our own mothers with thanks as we enter into the silence and just allow ourselves to live in gratitude for this gift of life that we have all received, primarily through our mothers, but through so many other interconnections that continue to sustain us and nourish us. with hearts full of gratitude for this gift of life through our mothers and fathers and all who nourish us. Let us chant Shalom, Salam, Shalom 3 times. Shalom. That was 3. I'd like to first of all acknowledge and welcome the mother of Yanis Navarro, Mrs. Senora Leonora Estrada. Bienvenida. Our theme for today is approaching the third of the stages of the spiritual path, as we have looked at in the spiritual history of humankind, which we are now seeing as a threefold stage that can be seen across religious traditions. And these are the stages of purification or purgation, illumination, and thirdly of union. And we have already discussed this in previous sessions and chapters. So I would like to first of all note a proposed correction that was given to me by Father Adolfo Nicolas, who was my theology professor in Japan when I was studying theology then, who now happens to be the Superior General of the Society of Jesus. I dedicated the book to him, and I emailed him that he was going to receive it in the mail, and a few weeks later, after he had received it, he sent me an email saying, "Yeah, thank you for writing this book. I just want to have a brief suggestion for the format that can be taken, because, well, I understand and I affirm the threefold stage that you have outlined there. But," he said, "in my own reflections on the exercises and through my conversations with a Jesuit who also is familiar with Hindu spirituality," he says, there may be another way of including a fourth element which comes after the first two, namely after purification and after illumination. From a Hindu perspective, there comes the stage of sacrifice, when you have to let go of things in order precisely to arrive at the culminating stage, namely union. So I had simply collapsed those two and put them all together as union with the divine through death, arriving at the newness of life. But he says it might be helpful to note that third stage as a distinctive stage that people need to really see through and really live through and understand what it's about, rather than just incorporating it in union. So that's one suggestion that he made. And it was confirmed by another Jesuit whom I had just talked to when I was visiting Munich last week. He says that, well, the exercises can be seen as a twofold binary structure, where the first 2 weeks, purification, and then illumination, after having been purified. Now you see the light and see how to live in the light of that purification. And then the second stage, again, going through darkness and then seeing the light. So a twofold binary process of transformation that this Jesuit, who is a scholar of Christian-Jewish relations, his name is Father Christian Brutus Hauser, who happens to be now the provincial superior of the Jesuits in Switzerland, made that suggestion, but which somehow corresponds with the fourfold structure of Father Nicolas. So I'd like to just keep those in mind for you to not get stuck on the categories and see that there are different ways of putting outlines or structures in the same process that we're undergoing, namely the 4 weeks of the Ignatian exercises that we're looking at with a Zen eye. So now what can we learn from that third stage, or the third week, which is now in my schema part of the stage of union? the chapter that I offered with reflections on this is called Dying, You Destroy Our Death. That comes from an acclamation in the Catholic Mass, whereby after the consecration, where the priest has already uttered the central words of the Mass, which says, "This is my body given for you," then, "This is my blood given for you." One of the acclamations, the more usual one, is "Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again." There's another version that says, "Dying, you destroyed our death. Rising, you restored our life." So that phrase, "Dying, you destroyed our death," is my title of this chapter that I invited you to read beforehand for this session. And I have to confess, it's although there are things that are somehow corresponding to what I intended to convey, the chapter is a little jumbled up and maybe disorganized. If you read it in one sitting, you may not see the structure or the cohesive pattern in that chapter, except if you see that they're all pointing to the same experiential process of dying and finding newness of life from different angles. So that's what I could hope to be the unitive and cohesive factor of that chapter. But the ideas and elements themselves come from all sorts of different places, like from Zen, there's from the Hindu tradition of Ramana Maharshi, and then from the Eucharist and so on. But hopefully you can see through those various themes and just see the singular theme of dying, or through death, through newness of life. So now how can we approach that this afternoon? I will just highlight 3 points, maybe 3 or 4, that may be helpful for us in appreciating what this process may be, and maybe some of us have already undergone through this in an experiential way, so it's just a confirmation or perhaps a way of shedding more light on what you're already going through or have gone through. So I'll just offer it as such and see how it comes out in our discussion after the presentation. So the first point then is the fact that we all, having been born, are going to die. That's one of the things that we know is 100% sure. I am going to die. So with that certainty, how do we reckon with that? Now, having been born in this life, again, with acknowledgement to our mothers as we celebrate Mother's Day today, and with the help of our fathers also, with some help from our fathers maybe, in going through all of this. Now we are at our stage, and through those different stages that we recall, from infancy, childhood, youth, young adulthood, and so on, we may not have realized that fact to the extent that we are able to realize it now at this stage of our lives. Maybe, well, we thought, oh yeah, everybody's going to die, but it did not really come to us yet. So maybe what can happen is that at a young age, a close friend may die, and it suddenly hits us. I too can die and will die. My son Florian, when he was a freshman in college, he's now a senior, had a very close friend of his from high school die after through getting killed in an accident, in a very, very unusual accident. The friend of his was taking a summer break or a summer program in Europe with some other students in Prague, Czechoslovakia. And it seems that one night after they had just they had gone out of town and enjoyed themselves, drinking beer and so on, and they were walking on their way home. On their way, they saw this train that was stopped, and then so they all decided, oh, let's get on top of the train. And they did, and this friend of his happened to have touched a live wire that killed him there, and he died on the spot. So we had the service here. Floyd went back from Austin and joined the service, and I also joined and also met the parents who were part of the circle of high school families that we had known also. Our boys were going to high school. So that kind of unexpected death can happen to us. And so for several weeks he was kind of laid back and kind of introspective. So I don't know, I haven't really talked with him yet as to what that experience did to him. But it's a kind of experience like that, the death of a close friend or somebody in our immediate circles, that can awaken us to that fact in a very, very clear way. And as I ask if I ask each one of you, I'm sure that you would have your own stories of when death confronted you right in the face in your own way, whether it's being told that you have cancer yourself, like Bill was recently, or some other form. But that's what I'd like to just begin with as our first point. I am going to die. Now, how do I live my life, the rest of my life, in the face of that? And that was the same question that Ramana Maharshi, the person who became known as Ramana Maharshi, faced when he was about 16 years old. He was a precocious boy, and ever since he was a child, he was already asking about things and also wondering about this fact of life, and also somehow was afraid of death because he had heard of, or he may have encountered death in a context like his growing up in India at the time. So this young man who had this sensitivity also and questioning about death, at some point in his when he was 16 years old, decided that he was going to find out for himself. So what did he do? There is an account of him that relates this very deep experience he had, which led to his becoming not just the young man that would have been a promising young man at that time, going on to further his education and becoming a professional or becoming a civic leader or whatever, but became the religious and deeply spiritual person that he was and is now to all of us, Sri Ramana Maharshi. So this young man was named Venkataramanan, and so what he did is enshrined in a passage that is also cited in this work. So let me just read some excerpts of it as our launching point, as an invitation to an exercise that we might also try on our own. Maybe not in the same form, but at least in some way that might help us see this fact of dying in order to destroy them. Ramana Maharshi is now known to us and as a great sage who underwent this passage from death to life, and this is how he relates, having gone through that. In his early teens, he lost his own father, and so he was from then on overcome by this fear of death. So he says at some point, I was sitting alone in a room on the first floor of my uncle's house. I seldom had any sickness, and on that day there was nothing wrong with my health, but a sudden violent fear of death overtook me. There was nothing in my state of health to account for it, nor was there any urge in me to find out whether there was any account for the fear. I just felt I was going to die, and began thinking what to do about it. It did not occur to me to consult a doctor or any elders or friends. I felt I had to solve the problem myself then and there. The shock of the fear of death drove my mind inwards, and I said to myself mentally, without actually framing the words, now death has come. What does that mean? What is it that is dying? This body dies. And at once I dramatized the occurrence of death. I lay with my limbs stretched out, still as though rigor mortis had set in, and imitated a corpse so as to give greater reality to the inquiry. I held my breath and kept my lips tightly closed so that no sound could escape, and that neither the word I nor any word could be uttered. Well then, I said to myself, this body is dead. It will be carried stiff to the burning ground and there burn and be reduced to ashes. But with the death of the body, am I dead? Is the body I? It is silent and inert, but I feel the full force of my personality and even the voice of I within me, apart from it. So I am the spirit transcending the body. This body dies, but the spirit transcending it cannot be touched by death. That means I am the deathless spirit. All this was not dull thought. It flashed through me vividly as living truths which I perceived directly, almost without thought process. I was something real. The only real thing about my present state and all the conscious activity connected with the body was centered on that I. From that moment onwards, the I, or self, with a capital S, focused attention on itself by a powerful fascination. Fear of death vanished once and for all. The ego was lost in the flood of self-awareness. Absorption in the self continued unbroken from that time. These are words, so temptation for us in hearing or reading these words is to imagine images and so on, and that kind of can deflect us. But what I'd like to just offer is an invitation to just take those words as pointers and try out something similar in our own way, whether we may lie down in a comfortable place like on our bed or on a mat, yoga mat at home, or just sit on a comfortable chair and just allow yourself to just go into that mode of awareness of imagining yourself in the process of dying. And then just ask, who is it that who is dying? Who dies? What is this that dies? And in doing so, just be there in silence and let your heart and mind be open. That's all I can say. And what he says in words, don't trust as words. See what happens in yourself. Who is it that's going to die? So just follow his suggestions about the process. Repeat reading it again, then just try it yourself. See what happens. Just as a note, recently I was talking with someone who related to me that she had a very deep spiritual experience where she was in a state of bliss for about 10 months, and then when it somehow, the state of bliss, the emotional high somehow kind of tapered off, and she now lives in a normal way, normal awareness. But still, what she saw and what she experienced remains with her and has changed her life forever. And what was that she saw? I asked, what was it? What did you experience? Well, she said she had already been a regular practitioner of meditation in her own style. She may have, I think she learned it from reading books on insight meditation and so on, and also from Thich Nhat Hanh's recommendations on mindfulness and so on. So she was already practicing mindfulness in her day-to-day life, and also giving herself time within her busy professional life and as a mother of two young children to give herself that inner space to meditate on a regular basis. So she had that habit of being mindful of the present moment and so on. So one time she said, well, her mother was at home visiting, and she had a conversation with her mother, and her mother said something that irritated her. And so yet she did not want to show that irritation because, well, she respected her mother and so on, and did not want to just contradict and so on, or say, don't do that or something. But in any case, what she did was to ask herself, who is it that's irritated? Who is it that's irritated at my own mother? And somehow in just letting that question simmer and sink in, something flashed and it triggered something into her, which gave her this surge of great bliss and joy. which, as I said, she already told me, lasted about 10 months. And so from then on, she continued her professional life. She continued with taking care of her children, her husband, and so on. And yet, she said she was in a totally different plane for that length of time. And then, that was already about 2 or 3 years ago, and still she continues her same work. No more emotional high in the same level that she had experienced from that first experience, but still that gave her an entry into a new way of looking at reality. And so the question for her that triggered that experience was, who is it that gets irritated? Or maybe in our own way, as we can translate that, when we're walking, for example, in our slow walk, who is it that's walking here? Aware of that sensation on the soles of my feet, the cold floor, or the breeze on my skin. Who is it that's aware? Or when we hear a sound, who is it that hears? Who is it that sees this color in front of me? Let that kind of question just be the trigger for something that might open up our own hearts and might cause us to die to this little idea of I, me, mine, thinking I am this, I am doing that, my little self with this personality, with this background that I have to affirm and must not allow to be downplayed and so on. That little I may be seen through, and you may see a whole new dimension of reality, which will call to the depth of that little self, but which will give birth to a whole new, different horizon of what we can call or identify with as I. That I that goes beyond time and space. That I that also is there in the religions, that is expressed in the words I am. Just maybe. Again, don't take my words as any assurance. This is just an invitation to try it for yourself. So that's the first point I'd like to offer. Taking a deep breath, turning a page. A second point for today, which you can again have as our point of discussion, choosing the first one that I just mentioned in summary, or as the second one would be something that inevitably comes up when we look at this question that Ignatius places before us in the third week of the exercises, namely the passion and death of Jesus Christ, which we are now invited to look at with the Zen eye. Let me begin by recounting a conversation with a fellow Zen teacher, which I also described briefly here. Some years ago when I was in a Zen teachers meeting, we have an annual Zen teachers meeting, and there are about from 30 to 50 Zen teachers of different traditions, Soto, Rinzai, Korean, Vietnamese, and of course our own combination of the Haradayastani lineage. Zen teachers gather together and just have a 3 or 4 day meeting of themes related to our teaching, our practice, our sanghas, and so on. And also we have fun together. We have a night out where we go to a restaurant, and we have a so-called no talent show toward the end of it, where we sing, say jokes and so on. I heard some of the more colorful jokes in that kind of gathering than elsewhere and so on, or that can match any kind of colorful jokes that you would hear elsewhere. But anyway, we have fun also besides considering serious matters in Zen. Anyway, we were going to our dinner place that night out, to our restaurant. It was just about 15 minutes ride away from our meeting place. And so we were taken in different cars. We were in a caravan of about 5 cars, so and vans. So I was sitting together with a Zen teacher who comes from a Jewish background before she became a Zen teacher. She no longer practices in the Jewish tradition, but is a fully is fully Zen Buddhist teacher, as she says. Anyway, she knows that I come from a Catholic background and that I continue to practice in the Christian Catholic tradition while also engaging in this practice of Zen and also guiding others in Zen. So she asked me, well, one thing I can't understand about Christians is this thing about Jesus dying on the cross. that God had to kill His own Son for for others to be saved, for eternal life and so on. I just don't get that part of Christianity. Why did Jesus have to die on the cross? Why did God have to kill His own Son to save all of those others? Couldn't God have just said, okay, you're saved, and so on? Well, this is a kind of theological framework that got into Christian popular mentality, specifically since about the 11th century with Anselm of Canterbury, who wrote a very seminal work which in Latin is entitled Cur Deus Homo, which means why did God become human? And he tried to outline a theology of satisfaction, namely not satisfaction in terms of the satisfaction of having something that you're satisfied with, but a theology of a justification of sinful human beings before God by saying that because the sin of humanity against God was so built such a huge chasm between God and humanity, there had to be a something of a magnitude of, or something of the same magnitude that would bring us back to God, and so it had to be God who would have to do that kind of rectification, and so God had to send, or God deigned to send God's own Son to die so that He would be the bearer of the punishment of the sins of humanity. And so that's the kind of theology that is now going around as what Christians believe. Now I can't deny that many Christians believe that, but that's only one version of, well, what the good news is all about, which if you really look at it, does not really sound like good news at all. Why would a loving father have to kill one's own son and so forth and subject him to such cruelties that Jesus had to suffer through and so on? So in that sense, it doesn't make any sense to so many of our contemporaries now, and so they would just write off Christianity as still a childhood or a very childish kind of religion that believes in these kinds of outlandish notions of an infinite God and so on. I'm sure that some of you would say, yeah, I know, I don't get it myself, if that's the way you think Christianity is. And I myself struggled through this, and I was in my 20s when I had some experiences that enabled me to see through that and made me realize that that whole picture is really, in a sense, not too appealing at all, and really, for me, I don't see how that can be good news at all. So that's not my theology of Christianity at all. That's not what makes me Christian, not that theology. What makes me Christian, if I'm asked? Well, it's just a way of looking at what that event, which let's say is, people may still argue whether Jesus was a real historical figure or not. Well, there is this human being who is subjected to a very unjust process of being condemned to death and is condemned to die in a cruel way that was known at the time, namely dying by being crucified on the cross. And what I hear is that the person so crucified dies of asphyxiation because you can't breathe anymore, so you're just there and finally just give up the ghost, so to speak, give up your breath and just die right there. After hours and hours, could last a couple of days of just intense suffering. And that's what happened to this man who, from all accounts, was not really guilty of any crime except for what people in high places thought he was doing, namely to challenge their authority. Anyway, that's what happened to this human being that is known in history as Jesus of Nazareth. Now, if we recall what we are taking in this process of following Ignatius in the exercises, we are trying to see how the exercises can be offered to those who do not necessarily take the doctrinal position of the Roman Catholic Church nor of the Christian community as their own, but seeing what the process might be able to offer to us as human beings seeking answers to the question, who am I? What is the meaning of life, and so on, and what's the point of human suffering, and how can we really address the question of human suffering and be able to live in peace with it and trying to address it in the best way we can as human beings together. So with those questions in mind, we are looking at Jesus, and we have looked at him as a teacher who also rose beyond conventional wisdom and challenged the conventional wisdom of his time, and in having done so, really rocked the boat, so to speak, and ruffled some feathers, and those feathers that were ruffled had the power to really put him to death, and they did so, and that's what happened. How do we see then the role of this man as something that can speak to us in our own lives, whether we're Christian or not? That's the question I'd like to just put on the table. And so Christians regard that death on the cross as his way of atonement, of atoning for the sins of humanity, this kind of scapegoat mentality that we, so just like a child, in some cultures I hear that the children of rich families are punished not by having themselves whipped because, well, they're too, their skin is too sensitive, so they get a child from a lower class family, and they whip that boy, saying, "Oh, see what you did, you bad boy, here is your punishment." And so they whip another boy. That's what the term whipping boy is called. So the whipping boy, which comes from a person of a family that the rich family would hire for that kind of process, a very gruesome kind of custom, I know, but there seems to be cultures that do that. So Jesus Christ became the whipping boy for humanity's sins, or another word for it is the scapegoat. In cultures also, some scholars know there's a practice whereby they kill animals, saying, okay, in killing this animal, in sacrificing this animal, the life of this animal becomes the exchange to the divinities for saving the rest of the people. And sometimes, in some cultures, it's even other human beings who are killed in that regard. There's a scholar named René Girard who has studied this kind of violence that is associated with religious rites and so on in a very, very insightful way that led him at some point to then realize that there was something about the gospel of Jesus Christ that spoke to him and to in general and to humanity. So he became a Christian after doing some research on this and also doing some theological reflection. So anyway, René Girard, check him out. He has books like Violence and the Sacred and a few other related things. But he saw through this way of human beings as really seeing how violence is a part of religion that has this very complicated role, which I can't go into now, but just as a task. So now what do we do with this violent death of this man, this innocent man, Jesus? I cannot go into the entire theological discourse that will call for all of the gaps to be filled, but I can just offer one invitation for those of you interested in this. First of all, to see that notion of the atonement, that Jesus died for our sins, is not in that way that he was the whipping boy of all of us and therefore God was satisfied and now we can all be welcomed by God again. That's a very childish way I would tend to think, and I don't think that I can say I'm a Christian because I believe in that kind of theological framework. That's not my theological framework at all. But what is it? What is it that I would have been able, that I would have answered? How would I have answered my Zen teacher colleague who asked me, why did Jesus have to die on the cross? I was just beginning to start out with a theological discourse, and then we were told, okay, we just got there, now time for dinner, so we were all headed to the restaurant, so I did not have a chance to, and so it's been something I've been reflecting on ever since. But I just offer a few words in the book that might shift the perspective from why did Jesus have to die in that context of being punished for the sins of humanity, to one whereby it's not so much Jesus dying for our sins or dying for humanity, but dying with humanity. In that, in accepting his death and finding peace with it, somehow he accepted our human condition, found peace with it, and showed us a way of liberation. That's just one verbal way I'd like to offer for you to consider in looking at what Jesus' death can mean for you. That Jesus is not there to expiate for our sins as our scapegoat, but he's showing us, look, each of you, you will also have to die in your own way. You will also have your cross, so to speak, if you can take that language. You will have your own cross to bear. You will all have your karmic baggage that you are already carrying. So live that, accept that, and live and die through it. And you'll find peace. So it's that acceptance of the human condition that one can see as a basic message here. And not only that, it's not just acceptance of my human condition, it's also my accepting of the death and the suffering of each and every one of my fellow sentient beings, having been born, going up, aging, getting sick, experiencing suffering in so many ways, then going on to die. So it is my way of embracing the lot of all humanity, of all sentient beings, and accepting that I am that. And in doing so, then that's where the key to our own deep inner peace can be. That's salvation. That's wholeness. It seems to be an oversimplification in the way I present it, but I would like to just offer that as a way through understanding what this death of Jesus on the cross can be, using that kind of theological language. It's not so much the whipping boy notion, but it is simply an acceptance of our solidarity, my solidarity with all, and Jesus shows us the way to that solidarity with all humanity. As we take our own karmic baggage, our own karmic load, and live with it and die with it. And in doing so, we see we are one. There's no separation. I am you, you and you are me. That's the key that I'd like to offer to this. So in that regard, what do we do then with all the world suffering now? I also relate the bleak situation of our world, of 20,000 or so children dying daily of malnutrition-related causes, of those many other violent things happening in our world today. How can we deal with that? Well, we want to live in a way that can at least contribute to a better world, to heal the wounds of the world. But first and foremost, we are invited to first accept that that is the lot of humanity, not in a resigned kind of passive way, but having accepted it, now this life is no longer something I live just for myself, but now I have accepted my lot with all sentient beings and with all humanity, and thereby I am now empowered to live the rest of my life. Now that I've died to myself, I can live the rest of my life, offering my life as a gift that others may live a more abundant life. That's precisely the kind of news that Jesus gave. I came that they may have life, and life in abundance. So we're invited to look into our lives and see the gift, the infinite gift therein, that we are given this life, that we are now called to die to in our clinging to it, and in doing so, we'll see that whatever is left is now an infinite gift that we can offer to the rest of humanity in living our own karmic heritage, living our own karmic lot, and in within that, offering ourselves as a gift to all, as a way of lightening the burden of one another. In our own little ways perhaps, but for some people maybe in more grand and more spectacular ways than others. just live as I am, as that gift, having died to myself. That's the invitation I'd like to offer for this particular understanding of why did Jesus die on the cross? Why do I have to die to myself so that I can truly live what I truly am? And what is that? What does that imply in my own day-to-day life from here on? So again, this is not just something that we can settle through concepts, arranging concepts in our head, but take those times of silence that can be the place where this can truly erupt in us and give us that total freedom to live in that way. These are just pointers. The words are just pointers. Okay, now finally, just the last point I'd like to offer for today. The Eucharist is a Greek word. I was in a Greek restaurant with some friends sometime, maybe a couple of years ago. And I was just curious, asking, how do you say thank you in Greek? And the server said, oh, we say Eucharisto. The F is E-U, they pronounce it F. Just like the U and V in German are not separate, but so Eucharisto instead of Eucharisto. The H is the CH, an aspirated H. So Eucharisto, thank you. And how do you say you're welcome? Parakalo. Anyway, thank you, you're welcome. That word Eucharisto is the same word used by Christians in this ritual of thanksgiving, taking the death of Jesus as the central memorialized event whereby someone gives one's own life for all, and we commemorate that, and we also follow that invitation to give our lives also together with that gift that was given to all of us, and in doing so we live a life of gratitude. So that's what we can take this term Eucharist to mean, an invitation to live in gratitude. But Christians have taken that as their central ritual, but even if you're not Christian or Catholic, take that word as a key to living a life of gratitude. And so what does that involve? Well, the Christian ritual involves taking bread and wine as Jesus is said to have done in the last night before he was arrested and then put to death. And he gathered his disciples and took bread, and after everybody had kind of taken their fill and no more wrangling about, please pass me that and so on, after everyone was comfortably seated, he said, please listen, I'm about to tell you something important. This bread, this is my body given for you. And he took the cup of wine and said, this wine is my blood. It will be shed for you. Do this in memory of me. Those are the words that Jesus is said to have uttered during that last dinner that he had with his close friends. And of course, Leonardo da Vinci memorialized it in that famous Last Supper scene. And if you look at that, someone asked, why didn't they sit on the other side of the table? And so many other things you can wonder about in those artistic pieces. But anyway, that's a piece that we all know about, the Last Supper. But well, whatever that, so that was the context in which Christians now take that ritual. And so this is what I'd like to offer as my final point. In saying, this is my body, the priest or the pastor or minister or whoever is presiding says that. But it's not just the pastor. Luther also has a very important point, Martin Luther, who said that it's not, the priesthood is not just for an elite people, an elite crowd, but all people who are followers of this message that Jesus proclaimed are priests in themselves. They are mediators between humanity and the divine. So be a priest then, a mediator of the divine among humans. And in so doing, when the words are said, "This is my body given for you," you're also invited to let that be your own word, in tone with the priest or with the presider. "This is my body given for you." Maybe you don't have to say it aloud because he will be looking at you. Who is this imitating the presider? Just say it within yourself. "This is my body given for you." Or just let it sink in and hear it and allow that to resonate. "This is my body given for you." And embody that. "This is my body given for you. This is my blood shed for you." How would that resonate in you? That's just my invitation. Whether you believe in the doctrinal presuppositions of the Eucharist or not, just take those words and let it resonate and see what it can do. And again, in my healing breath, I have a whole chapter that tries to point out the implications of this. So if you'd like to check that one out, I'm sure you may have been given a copy when you went to orientation, or there's still copies at MKZC in boxes, which I put in my, I have about 7 boxes of them in my office right now. Anyway, as an MKZC member, I can give you one if you don't have one yet. Anyway, in that chapter, "This is my body," I note that bread really is the representative of all the gifts of the earth. It comes from the wheat that was raised in the fields, that was nourished by the sunlight and by the rain and by the grass and by the ground and by the elements and by all of the worms that were there and so on. In an interconnected way, the whole earth, the whole gift of earth is there in that bread and in that wine. So the whole earth then is here. And in saying, "This is my body given for you," we're part of that. We are earth. We are part of earth. This breath that we breathe is the same breath that vivifies all living beings. And so in acknowledging that, we are acknowledging our oneness with all of earth being offered, given for you. So it's an exchange of gifts. We receive the gifts of earth and we give back our life to the world, back to the earth, in that event that memorializes this gift. "This is my body given for you." So in a sense, we have to die to our little self that just wants to take the gift, and now we're invited to give back ourselves as a gift. And "This is my body given for you." And so what happens in that ritual? Well, those who participate are invited to come up and take that bread, eat it, come back to the seats. Okay, now you've taken a bite of that bread. It's now melted into you. It's now melted into your body. It's now part of your body. It is now your body. Really, literally what you just said earlier, "This is my body given for you," is now actually realized when you actually ate that bread. And if you also have the ritual where the drinking of the cup of wine is accompanying it, then this is the same thing. "This is my blood shed for you." Although Methodists and other Christian denominations only use grape juice, but in Catholic and maybe Episcopal services they use wine. Anyway.
Fermented grapes.
Pardon?
Fermented grapes.
Fermented grape, that's right. In any case, either one of those or both, "This is my body given for you." Let that sink in and allow you to die to your little self and see where it might open to a newness of life. And see the horizons that get open up from there. That's all for today, and I'd like to invite you to, go into, first take a break and then go into, let's say, 2 groups now, since there are about 11 or so. But let's first have, before we take a break, I'd like to invite this whole group to feel free to ask questions or share in conversations as a group together and just raise issues and comments. Yes, Helen.
Yeah, the irritant between the mother and the daughter.
Mhm.
The mother was chanting and she didn't chant correctly.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Remember?
okay.
Huh?
Yeah, well, that
It
was
was
the
just the
yeah.
exchange.
Sure, I did not go into the detail of what irritated the person that I shared. They're they're a Buddhist family, and the mother was they do chants, they do Buddhist chants together, and her mother was not chanting the thing correctly. She said, why can't she do it right? But so rather than scolding or chiding her mother, she just kept it and, who's that that's irritated? And that's what opened up something. A
Let me just
continuation
finish
of that,
with it.
and
And then after that, I think she was very, very thankful to the mother for
yes,
that
exactly,
mistake.
exactly. Thank you for doing that. That irritated me because that triggered. Yeah. So anyway, this is Helen. Helen was there when we had this conversation. So and it's just a lovely person. Anyway.
Well, I just wanted to know if you could repeat I think you made 3 major points that we could focus on our meeting, private meeting.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so choose 1 or 2 or all of the above or none of the above. First one is, well, this question of who is it that dies? I gave you the experience of Venkata now called Ramana Maharshi, as a starting point. Anything that strikes you in that regard. Regarding your own question of death, that I am going to die, so that's the first point. My own death and how I am dealing with it, and how this exercise might open some new horizons. Secondly, the question of the atonement, whether if you were born and raised a Christian and you had that idea that was taught in Sunday school about Jesus dying on the cross for our sins and so on, and you somehow didn't really think that or maybe you still do think that that's what your theology is like, fine, so just talk about that. And another way of looking at the meaning of the death of Jesus that can make sense for someone who may or may not be an adherent of the Christian tradition, whether that can make any sense of really not dying for our sins, not dying for humanity, but dying with humanity. And is that saying something to me that I'm also invited to consider for my own life? Can I die for my friends, or for my loved ones, or for someone that happens to be in need of my help at some point, and then all of a sudden the roof crashes in on me and I lose my life? Will I regret my action if that happened to me? And so on. So that kind of dying with others. And then thirdly, this whole question of living a life of thanksgiving. First, needing to die to oneself so that my life can be open to one that is no longer, what can I get out of life, but how can I give myself so that those that around me may have life more abundantly. Those are the 3 points I'd like to offer for you.
I guess
Discussion.
it's moving from self to selflessness.
Correct. Good. So you've mapped out a good trajectory there, from self to selflessness, from death to life. Any other sharings, any points? If you would, just please translate to your mom and just give her the general outline. So, pardon? Oh, yeah, count 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And then just go take a break 10, 15 minutes and then come back to your, if group 1 wants to use the then, is that okay, Helen? And then group 2 can use this part. Okay?
2, 1, 2,
1,
2,
Together, juntos.
2.
Okay, so all the ones, raise your hand. Okay, that's 1 group. All the 2s? Okay, so let's take a break. Thank you.